Hey everyone, Arthur Fantastic, aka the Irresistible Venom, and today I'm here with Scary, Terrie, Bourgeois, MMA vet, BJJ black belt, wrestler, and overall badass. Terrie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, man. Yeah,
I didn't actually that so far. I was actually saving that for camera. That's real. It's real, guys.
yeah.
Today we're going to be talking about several things in our beautiful academy at CSA Orlando. We espouse the American Jiu-Jitsu, okay, and of course we also espouse the wrestling. Wrestle, guys. Um, I've got a couple questions for you, and since we're talking about wrestling, I think that would be the best place to jump off. Um, First off, it says online on your social media that you have some wrestling experience, and you also talked about some catch wrestling experience you've had in the past. Is that something you want to go in and talk about a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. I'm from St. Pete, which is next to Tampa, and for those that you don't know, Florida, but Karl Gotch actually died in Tampa, and some of my wrestling coaches were his last students before he died. He died, I want to say, like 2006, and I started learning catch wrestling from his students in 2008. And then I also trained with some other guys who had trained with Gotch in Japan. Um, at one point, I got tested in shoot fighting. I was like a level 6 or 7 shoot fighter, which is obscure.
Wow.
It means nothing to
I,
anybody.
I think that's awesome. I
Yeah.
didn't even know that. That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
No,
yeah.
I watched those old videos. Funaki, Fujiwara. Those are
Yeah,
awesome
dude.
tapes.
Yeah, I was got tested for that in like 2011 or something,
Wow.
like forever ago. But yeah, it's just an obscure thing that nobody even knows about anymore.
dude,
But
dude, nostalgia. It's coming back. It's coming
yeah,
back, dude.
yeah,
Everybody's.
yeah.
I don't know if I'm the only one, but I would love to see like some pancration fights, like
Oh,
no
that'd be great.
gloves, open hand slaps.
Yeah, more realistic, honestly.
Oh, dude, yes,
Yeah,
yes, I think so too. I think that would add, that it really affects the game. It really affects the game.
100%. I mean, these are meant for fine motor skills. They're not meant to be used as bludgeons, and we kind of found an alternative use for it. But I mean, like at the end of the day, like the three worst things that you can injure are your hands, your feet, and your lungs. I mean,
Wow.
I'm sorry, your ribs. Because you got to use your hands, you got to walk around, and you got to breathe. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
so it's like these are the most valuable tools we have, and we decided to use them for something so primitive that if you smash it, like, dude, that's a big tool in your wheelhouse you just lost. So,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. Um, while we're on the subject of wrestling, I know one of the subjects that we were discussing earlier were the delineation between the Russian and the USA system. You want to go more about on that?
Yeah, sure. So, when we're talking about like wrestling cultures, period, there, in my opinion, there are two main world powers, and that would be the U.S. and Russia. Now, that doesn't mean they're fantastic wrestlers across the world,
Right.
in India, the Middle East, things like that. But
Japan.
yeah, when we're talking about like just sheer volume, I think that the U.S. and Russia are pumping out the most high level guys. And when we look at like the difference in training styles and methodologies and ideologies with between the two different cultures. In the U.S., we're a very wrestling heavy culture. We quite literally have our own style of wrestling, folk style, that was created in the original 13 colonies. So that's what we teach scholastically. And one of the unique things about America is that we offer that scholastically. Most other countries, you have to pay for that. And so there's sort of a barrier to entry, whereas in public school, funded by taxes, you get the opportunity to do that just voluntarily. But when we're talking about the methodologies and the ideologies in America, it's very much based around attrition and like force, right?
Grinding.
Yeah, that like wrestler grinding mindset, right? And my coaches had like a lot of different things that they would say to us all the time, but one of them was that I think really embodies this idea is they would say, if strength doesn't work, you're not using it enough. And it's like, I mean, you're right, I guess,
Yeah.
whether
No,
or not you can
right.
Whether or not you can generate enough is the question, but
Sounds like something that came right out of Karl Gotch's mouth.
yeah, right, yeah, yeah. Conditioning's your greatest hold,
Right.
but when you look at like a culture like Russia and how they approach the same thing, they do it from a playful standpoint, right? They do it in more of like now kind of prominent term, but like an ecological standpoint,
Right.
right?
Ecological.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know my employees are
Yes,
grinning ear to ear right now.
yeah.
Hear me say that.
Yes, we use these words.
Yeah, but what they're really doing is they're keeping everything playful, right? And because of that, they're building longevity, and all of this is it's a tangible exposure based skill set, right? So the more opportunity you have to be exposed to it, the easier it's going to be for you to perform at a higher level with it eventually, right? So the whole idea of like upgrading the software without damaging the hardware. If I break my body, I can still work on my mind, but I can't express it, right?
Right.
So if you want a high level of expression, you have to be able to preserve your body while getting that exposure for a long enough period of time to build the knowledge base and the expression of it simultaneously. And so they figured that out. The Russians have so many things in the physical side of their culture that are just quite frankly brilliant. And that's why they have been at a world-class level with athletes across many different sports. But even like you see in the U.S., most of these guys that wrestle through school and college, and then they're trying to get onto the world team or they're getting to the Olympic team through trials. Most of these guys are done in their early 20s. Their bodies are destroyed.
Broken.
Yeah, they're just broken. And it's because of that attrition mindset in American wrestling culture. And then you also see guys coming from Russia. Recently, we saw guys that were in their 40s that were winning trials and getting onto the Olympic teams. And it's like even with the most outlier guys in like we talked about earlier, like in America, like a Jordan Burroughs or a Kyle Dake or something
Right.
like that, like those guys are the outliers of the outliers here.
Truly, the 1% of the 1%.
Yeah. And then guys like that in like Russia are common, like for this type of culture. And it's just because of that difference in approach.
Right. I would have to absolutely agree. They have some. Even though their practices seem more grueling than some of the. I mean, you hear Russia, it's like training. You don't do training. Training do you.
Yeah.
But that ecological approach explanation does make a lot of sense. I see the same thing in like Cuban athletes that have adopted the former Soviet Union modalities of training, where they're doing this play. Like the Cuban style of boxing is like we do like this little touching of hands, trying to tag each other in the head, but playing, not trying to kill each other. Whereas in the same sense, we see boxers that are trying to scrap all the time and try to go for the knockout, going toe to toe. They don't have long careers in the sport, and it's basically the same thing.
Yeah, and I mean that's also one of the things that I preached to all my guys is like I teach striking 5 days a week. Every striking class we do sparring, but we do stipulation-based sparring stuff. We make sure that nobody's sparring above like 40% max. And because again, it's an exposure-based skill set. You need to be exposed as often as possible to become proficient as quickly as possible. And so like a really common misunderstanding is that everybody talks about like being punch drunk or chronic traumatic endoskopathy (CTE), right? And they think that it comes from these like wars when they see guys fighting MMA and it's like this bloody war that they went through. It's not that. It's the micro concussions on a daily basis in the training room that add up over the years.
Yes.
And so like I think that in America, specifically the martial arts in America, we could take a lot of really strong, valuable lessons from our pro athletes in other sports. having off seasons, putting an emphasis on strength and conditioning in the off season, like actually tempering and preparing our bodies properly, not just this pohada every day, like,
Right.
killing myself 6, 7 days a week. And like, it's not conducive to longevity.
Right. Right. People's bodies aren't made to do that. They break down.
Yeah.
And it's gonna find the weak point and break it. And speaking of that goes right back into that grinding style of American wrestling. How does that transfer over to the title that you espouse, American Jiu-Jitsu?
So a lot of people get really mad at me for using the term American Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, it can be like a kind of a contentious point, but in reality, the term American Jiu-Jitsu actually predates Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's in literature multiple times. I mean, you can, easily research that stuff on your own. But
It's like it's in the catch wrestling material.
Mhm.
They call it the American Jiu-Jitsu.
Yep. And so when we look at the whole idea behind everything is evolution, right? We stand on the shoulders of the giants before us.
Right.
So every culture takes something and evolves it from the previous generations and previous cultures, right?
Right.
So when when we look at like, I remember I was talking to this, I won't say his name, but like a very, very high, well-known Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt from Brazil, multiple-time world champ, has massive lineages all over the world.
Wow.
And he got mad at me for saying American jiu-jitsu, and I go, okay. He goes, essentially, it's not American, it's Brazilian. It's our art, right? And he got really mad when I replied, where did the Brazilians get it from?
Right. The Japanese? The
Yeah,
judo?
they took it from the Japanese, and they grew and evolved it, right?
Right. Oh, I mean, before it was Gracie Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah.
And they were mad that they became Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Oh, but
Yeah.
American Jiu-Jitsu, oh my God, it's not even in the same country.
Yeah.
How dare they?
And exactly, and you just follow everything back. Like before the Japanese had it, it was the Chinese. Before the
Right.
Chinese, it was Alexander the Great, the Macedonians taking Pancratius from Greece, filling his armies and driving east. And what happens with all of these things? Like you take your people, you insert them into another area, whether that's through domination or war or whatever, right? What are they going to do? They're going to supplant themselves into the culture. They're going to have families. And if you come from a war tribe background, what are you going to teach your progeny? You're going to teach them what you know.
Or, right.
Yeah, you're going to teach them, right? And if you're blending the cultures, then it's going to become part of that culture,
Right.
right? And it's going to be passed down through a lineage, and they're going to grow and evolve it. And so that's it's the same thing that the Brazilians did with the Japanese immigration in the late 1800s, early 1900s into South America. It's the same thing that Americans are now doing with the Brazilians that migrated to the United States in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And like that is the point of all of it, is to grow and evolve it and make it better. And so American Jiu-Jitsu, the reason I call it that is because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu classically has a few very deep flaws, right? One is a major lack of stand-up wrestling.
Right.
They just kind of use bastardized judo.
Even though it comes from judo,
Yes.
it doesn't do what we would consider judo now. You know what I mean? Which is that's another thing to talk about another time.
Yeah. And so the lack of stand-up wrestling, right? And then there's also just this kind of gentleman's agreement that, okay, we're on the ground now, so we're just going to stay on the ground, which is not part of American wrestling culture. A really huge part of the strategy in American wrestling is to get up, to stand back up. I'm not just going to allow you to just keep me on the ground, right? And so the last thing is an emphasis on attacking the legs, and that's a whole propaganda that started in Brazil with the Gracies not wanting any competition for Luta Libre and all this other stuff.
So true.
And so they kind of demonized it, and But anyway, when we're talking about those three main flaws, I call it American Jiu-Jitsu because one, we specifically put a heavy emphasis on stand-up wrestling, right? That is the catalyst. If you ever want to apply Jiu-Jitsu on the ground,
Gotta get there.
you got to get there, right? And how are you going to get there? By choice or by force? Are you?
Force.
Well, I mean, like by your choice or being
Oh,
forced there,
right.
So, are you waiting to get punched or trip and fall, or
Yeah. You
or
crawling around?
yeah, are you going to be passive or are you going to be proactive with it? Are you going to actually be able to impose it, right? Talking about imposition, that's also another part of it, where it's like that kind of gentleman's agreement, right? Who are the hardest people to hold down? The people who refuse to accept being taken down,
Right.
being pinned, right? So you see this; it's really, really prevalent in MMA, right? But you don't really see it as much in jiu-jitsu, and that's another big part of it that I teach a lot, very heavily to my students is not just positional stuff, but imposition of the position. Learning how to impose and maintain the position against resistance, not just from regarding, right, but
Right.
also from people actively trying to stand back up. Because that's a huge part of it. That goes into the pinning aspect and the
Right.
wrestling part of the culture. And then obviously the first submission I ever learned was double wrist lock. The second was a knee bar, and that's all from catch wrestling. Right.
Nice.
So for me, I teach all my students leg locks from day one. And that all comes from my personal belief of a belief, a disbelief, I should say, in abstinence, right? I think across the board, abstinence just doesn't work. Abstinence breeds ignorance.
Right.
And so when you tell people to abstain from it because it's too dangerous, it's like, well, actually, what you're doing is patronizing, and you're basically saying you're not smart enough, or you're just too immature to be able to understand this properly.
Right.
And
But you can understand breaking a shoulder or an arm, or choking somebody out.
exactly, and legs have a very similar anatomy to arms. Obviously different usages and things like that, but when we're talking about like what is a heel hook, it's basically a kimura, right? Like just on a leg,
Right.
like same thing like a toe hold. You can make the same argument, right?
Right. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, they're all maiming moves, and people don't like to think of it that way because of the gentle art, but in reality, that's what we're doing. We're practicing strangling and breaking each other.
Right. I mean, from judo, the gentle way, it's like we learned the gentle way to do something that would basically maim or kill someone.
Horrifically violent. Yeah. Yeah.
I like that aphorism. Is that an aphorism? Is that the right word? The abstinence breeds ignorance. I think that's very true. I think that's very true. And, that actually helps me segue into the next subject, which was we were discussing how when martial arts is passing through from generation to generation, culture to culture, it's in transition. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, that we've been talking on this channel, in addition to what you were just talking about, the threat of standing up, check out that video, link in the description. We are been discussing how, like karate, for instance, there's a lot of like, oh, that's not karate, or this is not karate, specifically in discussion of what karatekas are in this conversation of karate combat. I know you like karate combat. I mean, it's this thing that's on the come up, and we're gonna discuss this for a little bit. But when we look at karate and like it's like katas, it's just like a snapshot in time of what is being transferred from one generation to another. And I think that when you're talking about evolution of martial arts that need to happen, I think karate combat is doing a good job, because they're allowing multiple styles like Muay Thai to fight karate. But when we're combining wrestling and jiu-jitsu and trying to make it a more full martial art, I think that is what makes a martial artist a more full martial artist, because we're trying to learn all of combat, not just a small subsection, because that is not realistic. You know what I mean? And part of martial arts is it being real. You know what I mean? I'm really getting punched in the face. I'm really getting strangled. Someone is folding my clothes with them in it.
Hmm.
And uh, on that note, what do you think about what Karate Combat's doing? Um, what do you think is making it so popular right now? I think it's on its way up. I think it's really gaining some traction.
Hmm. I think the biggest thing in my opinion is their addition of the threat of takedowns.
Mm,
It,
mm.
it has it completely changes the landscape of techniques that are available, right? And we've already known this in like MMA,
Mm.
but what is really doing is like doing striking for striking sake is cool, sure.
Yes.
That's like jujitsu for jujitsu sake or any other art, right?
Boxing for boxing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You do a very like linear deep dive, and at some point you start getting to things that only work for that art or that rule set, right?
Mm.
And so I think that what they're doing is making a really good. It's like a really intelligent way to transition strikers into MMA properly, right?
Mm.
Instead of like a James Toney just walking in and getting mauled
Yeah.
by Randy Couture with zero wrestling, or
He
you know,
said he was going to stand up with me. Yeah,
yeah,
right,
yeah,
James.
yeah. Come on, dude. Like, but like, they're giving strikers an opportunity to engage in dealing with the threat of takedowns without the extended periods of having to grapple on top of that.
Mm.
And so I think that makes a good segue into MMA, kind of like how Eddie Bravo with his combat jiu-jitsu,
Right.
right?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, I think that it's a fantastic way for people to segue from just straight sport jiu-jitsu into the ground and pound portion of fighting.
I can't wait till they allow stomps. Or
Yeah,
kickstand
yeah,
down in front of us. That'd be dope.
yeah, yeah. And so, like, I think that with karate combat, that's a really, granted, the president of it owning the goat shed and, having a stable of high level MMA fighters,
Mm.
having a little bit more insight, him obviously also being a world champion kickboxer,
I did not know that about President Asim Awesome. I think that he goes by Awesome, right?
yeah, yeah,
President Awesome.
yeah.
Come on my channel.
Yeah, yeah. So that was really cool forward thinking by him, in my opinion.
Agreed.
Bringing that change to it once he started, once he invested in the company and started really taking control of that stuff. Also bringing in the grappling in that pit.
I like that. Yeah.
It's a good cross between, obviously vertical wall wrestling is completely different. A lot of people just assume that like open water wrestling is going to translate really well, and it doesn't.
No,
like at all.
They always you end up getting pitted against cage.
Yeah. And so like having that like 45-degree slant is, I think, also a good segue into that stuff, because you can't quite pin somebody against it in the same way because of the angle. It's not completely 90 degrees like a wall.
Right.
Where, in that, with a wall being at that 90-degree angle, like on the floor, if I pin you into that corner in the floor, it can be really difficult to start to gain posture and altitude, right? Whereas like the pit is at a 45, so you're not wedged into a corner. You can kind of like still ride that angle up and gain posture a little bit easier. It's like a little bit easier segue.
A little bit. It does still suck.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah.
And I think that it also, you can't keep backing up.
Mm-hmm.
You can't back up forever. You're going to literally fall over. And that 45 degrees, like, you're going back and you're going to have to give up guard.
I also really love how guys are running and walking on it
Yeah,
and
me too.
using that to gain elevation to like, I think that's really cool because you can't do that on a vertical surface, obviously.
I agree too. I think the pit is one of the. I think it's like the most. I think it's the superior grappling platform. You know what I mean? The mat, infinite takedowns. Nothing's gonna stop it. cage, you get stuck up against the cage, ring, something similar, but it's also kind of hard to see with the
You go through it,
you
and
go through it, fall
they start
down.
adding ropes. You get tangled in it. Yeah,
And then just the platforms, I just think that there's a lot of hesitation on the athlete's part, and not always, because there's our sport is full of wild men, but there is sometimes where you're like you can tell that they're kind of going a little bit easier than they would have because they're like, oh, I don't want to take you over and you don't want to take me over.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, fucking go for it.
I also think it's a great alternative, like you're saying, to elevated stages.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Those little elevated platforms.
Yeah, because I've competed on those several times, and there's always kind of a fear of, well, if I fall off of this, I'm falling not just the 4 feet off of this thing, but if I've been elevated or thrown or
Right.
you know.
And you can't see when you're on that stage. It's impossible to see out there with the lights on you. It's you're falling into darkness.
Yeah, and everybody's kind of sitting eye level at your feet.
Yeah.
Versus like a pit, they're like looking down into it.
Oh
at
yeah,
you.
yeah. It's a superior. I've gone to the karate combats. It's a superior audience position for sure. Yes. It's I enjoy it. Yes, I agree. I agree with your assessment.
Yeah.
Well, while we're on the subject of karate and what they've got going in the pit, also what's going on in the grappling world, moving toward CGI and them using the pit, the development right now is that it seems like things are moving toward a more wrestling-based system. You're talking about the takedown threat in striking and the threat of standing up when you're doing jiu-jitsu, which I think once again blends right into your answer of American jiu-jitsu. And I wanted to touch on what you're doing here this month. It's November, guys. This is dropping the first week of November on my channel, and you are doing No Gi November. I think that all kind of leads to like what is going on with grappling. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts behind doing the No Gi November?
So I actually was really hesitant to do this, even though I am. My love has always been no-gi. I came from wrestling and catch wrestle. I went from folk style and in freestyle into catch, and then I went from there into like more MMA. And I actually never put a gi on until like I want to say like 7 years into all this stuff, and hated it. I absolutely hated it. And it's funny. It's a little ironic for somebody like me to come full circle and go, I kind of want to keep the gi on my schedule in my gym, but it's there's a lot of facets to that, and I think if we start off with talking about the direction the culture is taking, right? I think that this is specifically like very American, where we are a wrestling-based culture, like we've already discussed, and we are now becoming one of the main creators of high-level MMA fighters.
That's also true, yes.
And so you see this direction where guys want to go, okay, well, you don't really get paid at all in wrestling, and you don't really get paid well in grappling. So
True.
It's a little bit easier to get exposure as an MMA fighter. So people kind of want to go that direction. Because quite frankly, grappling is, I make this analogy, grappling is like golf, right? It's fun to do and it's boring to watch unless you do it.
Right, yes.
So it's like...
Especially with the rule set that is in place right now.
Yeah, and it's so easy for a complete layman to just watch an MMA fight and be enthralled by it and go, oh, this is really interesting, right? Versus like, a lot of other cultures have a lot more respect as spectators for grappling. That's kind of lost in America.
I agree, yes.
And
why do you think that is?
I think it's, again, going back to this really hyper-aggressive culture that we have. This whole idea of like attrition and things like that, where, our country is literally the war machine of the world, right? And so I think that we're just so jaded to violence that if we're not seeing any kind of impact created from velocity, it is boring. I think we see it with
Dang.
like movies and things like that too. The most
We've been desensitized
the most
to.
popular genre of movies is action, man.
Oh, love it. I mean, yeah, me too.
Yeah,
We're watching.
I'm the exact same way.
We're
I
watching
own all the
action
John Wick films, like
Me too.
but the problem with that is that when people watch those movies, they don't understand that
It's not real, or
it's not real, but they also don't understand that only certain things actually look good on
Oh,
camera.
yeah, right. Okay, I see what you're saying.
So like for instance, that's why they throw so many big hooks
Right.
in on film, because straight punches kind of disappear,
Right.
right? Unless you have very like specific angles, so it's harder to capture those moments. It's the same with grappling. Like when you do grappling against another actual skilled opponent, it takes time.
It's a lot of like small, subtle battles
Yeah.
you're having.
Yeah, it's a war of like centimeters.
Right, right. It is right, right. The inches, the battle of inches, as opposed to why people like, I think maybe like pro wrestling, where it's like these big movements.
Yeah.
They get a headlock, and they're like,
Yeah.
they were wrenching it, and you can see it for like a mile away.
Yeah.
But if you're passing guard and you just like got your knee in on their hip, maybe somebody in the corner saw it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of the where it doesn't really translate to film, and I think that also because that's so. Not only does the film industry, but the just pop culture period in America it influences the rest of the world. Our pop culture is so prevalent everywhere in the world, and because of that, everybody else kind of follows behind it too.
Right.
And because of the way that movies have, like the way that cinematography is done when it comes to martial arts, and what creates actual excitement, like even in the John Wick films, it was awesome that they incorporated grappling, but everything
Yeah.
that they did were flying triangles and
Yeah.
arm bars, and,
Right.
these big rolling throws,
Firemen,
and,
firemen.
and it's like that is such a small percentage of the techniques that are ever used.
True.
Aside from some of the throws, obviously, but
Right.
but like people see that and they go, "That's what fighting should look like."
Yeah.
And then when it comes to reality, and kind of red pilling yourself from
Right.
this bubble of pop culture, then you go, "Oh, it looks nothing like that."
Yeah, yeah. I had that red pill moment when my brother showed me a VHS tape of Kazushi Sakuraba and Peter Belfort, and I was like, "Oh, they don't. Why aren't they? Wah."
Yeah.
I loved Bruce Lee when I was a kid. I watched like Shaw Brothers and fucking Shaw Scope movies and all that, and Golden Harvest. And I was like, he, who, ha. I did Taekwondo, and then I see. Peter Belfort like falling on his back, and Kazushi Sakuraba double stomping him in the face. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
Jesus, this is different. It's not like he didn't do a back somersault, air flare into a fucking upside down butterfly kick. I don't know what what I
Yeah.
mean. Like when it was with Shaw Atkins, he does that, just that spinning.
Yeah. Or
crescent
Michael Jai
kick.
White, or like
Yeah,
all these
yeah.
guys. Yeah. And that's the thing is, like, even those guys, like a Michael Jai White, is a legitimate, hardcore, lifelong martial artist.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
But he still has to distill everything that he knows down to like a handful of things that look good for cinematography.
Yep. Oh man, Michael Jai White's also in good shape. I could give him that. Sometimes he
Yeah.
says stuff I'm like, you're ridiculous, Michael Jai
Yeah,
White.
yeah,
But
yeah.
but sometimes he says stuff I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
All right, Michael Jai White. So while we're on the subject of no gi, what do you think about the subject of gi versus no gi? What are your thoughts on this?
So when we're talking about like gi versus no gi, I think that the gi kind of gets a bad rap, and I think it's because, again, people are always looking for the easiest route, right? And the gi can be a little bit cumbersome. It can be like an added expense. It can be an added burden with like having to do more laundry now, and I got to remember to bring it from home or whatever, right?
Right.
But there are a lot of really positive benefits to it, and I think what's happening right now is the guys that are coming up, they're being influenced by all these veteran guys, as is normal,
Right.
But also not understanding that these guys that have been doing this for long periods of time, like they're also jaded and biased to certain things. And you go, okay, this guy's a black belt. I want to be a black belt one day, so I'm going to ask him his opinion on things, which is a valid way of trying to learn and gain exposure to stuff.
Right. Right. Find the path as it is.
And it takes a long time, like literal years, before you can kind of formulate your own opinions based off of your own experience, and actually have those opinions be valid, and so it's just easier for people walking in the door, white belts, to just go, oh yeah, I just like no-gi, because my coach likes it.
Right.
And I see a lot of issues arising from it personally. One of the biggest ones is a lack of emphasis on grip fighting. And we have to understand that, like, what we're doing is called grappling, right?
Right.
Grapple literally means to grab, right? And so I point this out to my students all the time because a lot of my students have only done no-gi. And they'll be training and somebody will like grab their wrist and they don't address it. And they can't figure out why they're stuck somewhere, why something didn't work. And I go, how long have they been holding your wrist? I don't know. I'll tell you, it's been like 30 seconds. I've been watching the timer, like you need to address the problem right away. Nobody's ever put an emphasis on it for you. And so you don't even view it as being a problem. And in reality, like we talked about, these are the most dangerous and valuable tools that I have. So it's like, if you can't use your hands on me, I've eliminated 98% of your ability to do much to me in grappling.
Right. People talk all about double trouble and controlling the legs. They forgot the hands.
Yeah.
The hands.
Yeah. And it's like, that's one thing that you cannot be ignored in the gi. You will never advance in the gi if you just ignore people grabbing your gi, right?
Right.
And so it's something that, like, as a learning tool, fundamentally, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from it is, like, they grab your collar and you go, no, this is not going to happen. Or they grab your sleeve or whatever, and you're forced to address it right away. Otherwise, the consequences are dire, right? You don't see that as much in no-gi, but that doesn't mean that it still shouldn't have an emphasis put on it, right?
Right.
Because the gi, you can establish such robust gripping that grip, if when we talk about a strategy and things like that, you see these guys that get into these like strong grip fighting battles, and the guy who establishes the strong grip first and not just has the initiative, but also the intent behind it. So they've established an initiative, they got the first grip that's a strong grip, but they also have somewhere to go with it, right? And so once that guy establishes initiative and intent with that grip, you tend to see them, statistically, you tend to see those guys control the sway and the direction of the rest of the match.
Right.
And it all revolves around that grip. Now, you don't necessarily see that as much in no-gi, but that also does not mean that you get to just ignore when people grab you.
Right.
And so it's a good learning tool in that sense. It's also a fantastic learning tool for beginners and, how do I put this nicely? People who are outside of prime age for fighting.
Okay.
So the people who are like, they're
It's a
never
very nice term.
Yeah, they're never going to be a professional fighter. They're never going to do this for. They may never even compete, right? Maybe they're in their mid to late 30s and they've got kids and a spouse and they've got a professional job, and that's the majority of students. And what the gi kind of affords them is the ability, because of higher levels of friction, to slow everything down. It's kind of a handicapping tool for learning, right? Because no gi is so fast paced, right?
Right.
Because there's very little friction, and so it can.
And you get wet with the sweat.
Yeah,
I mean, the ladies also enjoy it, but I mean, they sweat wet.
Yeah, and so like when we look at like it from that perspective, now we're starting to take a lot of speed and agility that like youth based athleticism out of the equation, and now you're kind of creating a more equal playing field for people to have a back and forth, where it's like I can actually begin applying techniques and you have to address them, right? You can't just like speed your way out of it.
Yeah, give it a little spin or a roll out.
Yeah. Now, like, that doesn't necessarily have the same translation for strength. So obviously strength is a very valuable thing. But as far as like kind of leveling the playing field, when we look at like the characteristic arc, or the physical characteristic arc of human beings, speed and agility start disappearing in your late 20s. Like, like you see it all the time in fighters, like these guys that seem untouchable early on in their career, and they start getting tagged and pieced up later in their career because they're slowing down. And that's just a natural part of aging as a human being. And then as you, like your endurance and your agility and your speed, those all peak in your 20s, right? And then as you get into your 30s, this old man strength term, that's from a hardening of your tendons and ligaments. So now the tensile strength, they're able to endure higher levels of tension, right?
Wow.
And so that's where you start hitting your peak when it comes to strength, is in your 30s. And then you get, these are all generalizations, but
Sure.
I've had a student tonight in his 60s who's crushing kids in their 20s.
Right.
But
he's got that old man strength.
Yeah,
he's got that old man strength.
And when you start getting into like your 40s, everything kind of starts to disappear.
Right.
And so I think that the gi is a really valuable tool for those people to still engage and participate in this stuff, aside from like I said, putting a higher emphasis on actually addressing gripping.
Well, while we're on this subject, no gi versus gi rule sets, I perfect question to end this on, and I think it's the perfect question to really discuss when we're talking about no gi rule sets and the gi, you know what I mean, is pulling guard. I know that sometimes Jiu-Jitsu Terra, they're like, well, Jiu-Jitsu is pulling guard, which I think that is not true. I think Jiu-Jitsu is a lot more than that. I think that grappling is a lot more than just that. But what are your thoughts on this trend of pulling guard in competition, and what do you think that means for the sport of grappling and martial and American Jiu-Jitsu, grappling in general?
I think that again, going back to really hyper-focusing on sport, right? Because unfortunately a lot of these sports, their governing bodies are so bureaucratic and they're run by people who have never even trained in the martial art. They've never even done the sport. And these people are making and imposing rules for it.
Right.
And so like when we start talking about like pulling guard, this is something that like maybe people will get upset at me for. But
they've got me upset on this channel many times.
Yeah. But in my opinion, there's only two reasons to pull guard. Try your best to change my mind. Anybody out there, I don't think that you can. One, either you don't know how to wrestle or you're lazy. This is really it. Like, wrestling is hard. There's a high level of energy expenditure, but there's also a high level of reward that comes with that as well.
Right, right.
When we're talking about like violence, just straight up, there is not a single human being that has ever existed that hits harder than the Earth.
Right.
Gravity is undefeated.
Right.
Like, if you pick somebody up and you violently deliver them back to the Earth, the dynamic has completely changed
Yeah.
versus sitting to your butt, right? But I always get the argument of like, oh, well, I just want to get right to the action, right?
Oh my gosh, I've heard this. Yes, absolutely.
God.
I mean, that's what we're trying to get to the ground.
You were just trying to get to the ground, bro. So I'm speeding that up.
It's like, why would you penalize me for this?
Yeah. It goes back to like that's just being lazy. But at the same time, strategically, you're putting yourself in a deficit. You're going, okay, I'm going to put myself in a deficit with this sort of arrogant attitude of it doesn't matter that I put myself in a deficit because I'm going to be able to not only create that equilibrium again and take myself out of that deficit, but I'm also going to win on top of it.
Right.
And when we look at like the general direction and sway of matches, similar to like I talked about with the gi and somebody establishing that strong grip with initiative and intention, it's kind of the same with wrestling. Like if you deal with somebody who's a strong wrestler and you're not a strong wrestler, if we just say that jiu-jitsu is equal, but one guy has better wrestling, the odds are they're going to be swaying the direction of the positions. They're going to be swaying the direction of like, you know, your ability to even just attack them, period.
Yeah.
Because that's also like one of the things that I've done a lot in competition, but also that frustrates my students who pull guard is like, they pull guard and I just walk away. And it's like, how are you going to apply this? I'm more than 3 feet away from you. Like,
right, exactly.
I don't have to engage you on your terms. Just like you don't have to engage me on my terms. All of this is fighting. There has to be imposition. I have to impose these things on you.
Right.
Right? You can't impose a guard pull on me aside from jumping guard.
Right. I agree.
And
I don't
the consequence of jumping guard is potentially me
Slamming
delivering you
you.
violently to the earth.
Right.
So there's a risk, you know?
I on that subject, I think that sports, jiu-jitsu specifically, has allowed these things to ferment in its practice. Like, you know, people going for certain types of, flying arm bars or arm bars in general and letting people pick them off the ground. I remember when I first started jiu-jitsu, if someone picked me off the ground, you lose. Start over. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And
yep.
so
I do that with my students.
Right, and that's the proper way.
If you're more than 12 inches off the ground, you're more than 1 foot off of the floor. Basically that's the same as getting tapped.
Yeah, let's just start over. I mean, would you rather see me what I would do? You know what I mean? And I think that that's lost in competition. The same thing goes for the sitting down of guard, because sumigeshi, tomonagi, judo moves that may be sacrifice throws, those are acceptable, you know what I mean, if they're done correctly. But it's this, I hold you, I let go, I sit down, I pull guard, engage me. It not only do I think it's lazy, I think it's disingenuous to the rules. I think it's disingenuous to combat. You know what I mean? He's like, why aren't you engaging my guard? He's like, why aren't you engaging me standing? In any other situation, as you said, you could just walk away.
Yeah.
You could kick him. You could pants him if you want to. But they could just stop you. So you could run around circles around them because they're immobile in comparison to you on your 2 feet. There's just a number of but we just have to entertain it because the rules allow it, and so I have to engage you, and so blah. And it's like people don't want to watch that. Also, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it hurts the sport.
I definitely think that it does, and I think that I think that it definitely hurts the sport, and I also think that like it's a severe watering down of the core purpose of the martial art.
Agreed. Yes, absolutely.
You see all these like joke videos on the internet of like oh, get in my guard, bro. Like they're in a street fight and he pulls guard and ass scoots towards him, and it's
Yeah,
like,
yes.
and it's like, if you truly want to be able to apply this insanely intricate and beautiful art on the ground on somebody, if you don't wrestle, if we're talking about like real world application here, which is the whole point of learning martial arts, is to have actual application. If you don't know how to wrestle, you're basically either waiting for it to be imposed upon you, like getting thrown or picked up and slammed, or maybe like getting punched in the face and tripping and falling.
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to even apply it?
It doesn't make any sense. If you were protecting your family, you wouldn't sit down and say, get in my guard. They'll just run around you and take your stuff and beat up your family. It would be a bad day for everyone involved. I think that you're exactly right. It's not what the Gracies did. Gracies, I look at the Gracie challenges, and not very often, maybe if they're like being nice to someone, they'll pull a guard on them. You know what I mean?
Well, they
like,
included strikes too.
yeah, exactly.
They would punch and kick in those things.
Exactly. They're going right to back mount, slapping them up a little bit, getting them in a nice tight choke, and that was it. It wasn't like some. They weren't doing deep half guard from butt scooting into reverse De La Riva, the Matrix move.
Yeah.
Right? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
PJ Danger Fanatics. I love it.
Yeah.
But it's just absolutely ridiculous. That's not happening. What's happening is something more like Francis Ngannou getting into your Z guard and just slamming away at your face as you know what I mean? Like, get the fuck up and defend yourself.
Well, I think this is a natural occurrence, because when we're talking about like when we talk about the core purpose of the martial arts, it's for fighting, right?
Yes.
It's for combat, and so when we talk about those things, it's difficult to practice all of these moves and have follow through and like actually practice them legitimately without high risk of injury, right? And so that's where sport comes in. That was the whole premise behind making things into sport, is that it gives you an opportunity to practice it in a sanctioned way where there's a third party involved that can, if it gets too close to death or maiming, they can step in,
Intervene.
They can intervene, exactly. You know, and the idea being that like you get to practice this on a fully resisting, knowledgeable opponent over and over and over again, right? Versus it all being theoretical until you're in an actual battle and your life is dependent upon it. And that's the whole premise that started this idea of practicing it in sport. However, then you have people who go from going, okay, I want to learn this so that I can protect myself, my loved ones, people I care about, to I want to win. And then human beings are masters. Exactly, they're masters of pattern recognition, right? So that's one of the major things that set us apart in evolution. And so when you go, okay, I see that these people keep doing these same things over and over, how can I exploit that to win, right? Then new rules get imposed to try and deal with that exploitation, and then they figure out another way to game it and exploit it. And that's why these rule sets become so extensive, is because of that evolution of people practicing it, competing in it, exploiting it. Okay, we need to readjust so we can get rid of this thing that we don't like, or this thing is too unsafe, right, for sport. And then you find people practicing it for the sake of sport. And they kind of forget the entire point of all of this. And in my opinion, if this is something that you cannot do, like if you can't express this in sport without also being able to express it on a decent level when potentially multiple people would be involved in an altercation on hard surfaces like cement or wood, potential opportunity for weapons of opportunity, you know,
Or even on the person.
yeah, and it's like if
I wouldn't sit in front of a person on the ground.
yeah, right, like if like there's just some moves that don't make any sense for real world application. You know, I get a lot of shit for this one too, but like I don't like arm bars, right? More specifically, traditional arm bars where you're sitting back.
Falling on the back. Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
Now, if we're talking about like a mounted armbar where I'm staying mounted on you and I'm vertical,
Yes.
sure,
Knee, shin on face or something.
sure. Now, there's no getting around the fact that chokes are king. You don't have oxygen, you don't have blood. Everybody dies. Doesn't matter how much adrenaline or how much red you see or what drugs you're on.
No one's tapping on the street.
Yeah, you know, and so you do with joint locks. You do kind of get into this gross game in the real world of like,
I'm gonna have to break this.
How many of your limbs do I have to break before you stop fighting me?
Yeah.
Right? It's a really horrific game. So like, but I get
Monty Python's.
Yeah,
Come back
just
over
a flesh
here.
wound.
This is a flesh wound.
You know, I kind of get a lot of shit for my dislike for arm bars because of that. And you know, I had a student who worked security. He loved arm bars. I begged him. I was like, you know, I won't name him, but I was like, please, do not, when you're working security downtown, do not try to fucking arm bar somebody, dude. What does he do? He Hirayagoshi's a guy. He gets into an armbar position, a classical armbar position. He's breaking the guy's arm. The guy bites a chunk out of his calf.
Damn.
I'm like, dude. And not only that, the guy that he was armbarring bit that chunk out of his calf. He broke the guy's arm, but the only reason he didn't get soccer kicked in the face by the guy's buddy, who was right there, was because when his buddy tried to soccer kick him in the head, another security guard stepped in and stopped him right before he landed.
Thank God. Wow.
And it's like, that is just sport application for real world that went awry.
Yes,
you know,
I agree.
And I've got so many examples of that. You know, obviously, if you know anything about me at all, I worked security for many years in multiple clubs. I ran security teams. I was head of security at multiple clubs. I've been in literally hundreds of real world altercations, ranging from one-on-one disputes to like I've fought multiple people by myself. It's not a movie. This stuff sucks. You know?
Yeah.
It's awful.
It's more like 8 Mile when he comes out of the trailer and the New World Order is there to give him a beatdown. It's not fucking John Wick.
Yeah, it's absolutely awful. You know, and
I wish it was like Old Boy.
Yeah, you know, like and the martial arts, specifically grappling and wrestling, saved my ass more than anything.
100%. Same here.
Like especially when we're talking about like our legal system, violence in the real world, kind of difficult to claim self-defense when law enforcement shows up in your cave and somebody's face in.
Yeah.
You know, versus like being mounted on them or they were choked unconscious and you get to kind of play stupid like, I don't know, man, this guy tried to fight me and like he just passed out. I don't know what happened.
Someone call the police, like that guy in New Zealand.
Yeah.
See that guy?
Yeah. But yeah, so it's like you know, I'm very much a proponent of practicing both sport and street application. I think that they both definitely can be valuable contributors to each other. But I think that doing one or the other, going to anything as an extreme is usually almost never good.
Agreed. I want, and I think it's starting with CGI where they're like, supine guard is not allowed for more than 3 seconds. Stalling calls. I think like things like that is going to move the sport forward. And I want them maybe there needs to be a change of rules so that this is not allowed anymore because people train for the sport and overwhelmingly when people do martial arts they train for their particular sport. And I also just want to highlight, he sees the same memes, guys. I've been talking about these memes where they're, get in my guard.
Yeah.
Get in my guard from back in the day, you know what I mean? Like, you know, was it a triple...
Yeah, he puts the mouthpiece in.
Yeah, exactly.
In an alley, he's like, get my guard, bro.
Get my guard, bro. I'm gonna rear naked you so hard. And it just really feels that way sometimes when I see high-level guard-pulling competition. You know, that shouldn't be, I don't think that really represents combat or martial arts or even jiu-jitsu in general very well when you know, you're sitting down. It's just it's lazy, it's disingenuous, it's not fun to watch. I could go on this all day, and there's so some of the subjects I actually want to do another follow-up, talk about Karl Gotch's, like you descended from in your lineage. What the F? I didn't even know that.
Yeah, 3 different lineages, three different people that I train with. Yeah, I would never, always secondhand. So bummed about that.
Dang.
Same thing with Billy Robinson.
Dang. And he's a legend. We've talked about Billy Robinson on the channel too. Before we end this, is there anything else you wanted to plug? Anything to put out there? Any promo you want to cut? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, please go follow my gym's page at csa.orlando on Instagram. We're also on Facebook and TikTok and YouTube and most major social media platforms. All of that stuff helps us quite a bit. We do a lot of philanthropy stuff too with our nonprofit portion of the business called CSA Cares. So those are all things where like we do toy drives, or we go work intimately with shelters and helping people with supplies, or we did a Christmas in July type of deal where
I saw that post. Okay, yeah.
we're also doing a whole thing in Paramore for Thanksgiving.
Wow.
We're helping people with food and getting supplies and things like that. Just basically, I have worked for many years with underprivileged youth as well. So we're trying our best to set up initiatives here where people can either donate and sponsor underprivileged youth to train here, and that would cover their tuition, that would cover any like supplies, equipment, things like that. We also are trying to work on an initiative where it's an add-on to our memberships, like an extra $20 a month, and that goes into a pool that we can start sponsoring underprivileged youth and bringing them in here.
Wow.
Because I was that, and this is one of the things that, like, statistically, I'm an outlier. I should be dead. I should be in jail. And the only thing that was consistent in my life, aside from violence, was the martial arts.
Wow.
And so it was something that took somebody like me, who was always getting in trouble for fighting, who was doing a lot of things that were getting me arrested as a teenager. I was very much on the wrong path. And so I try my best to be who you needed. And so that was one of the core purposes of us creating this business and the things that we do. So even something as simple as just following us on social media, giving us some likes here and there, it's all free, absolutely minimal effort, but that gives us traction with the algorithms, that helps us with reaching out to people, with getting our message out there to help as many people as we can. So even just something as simple and effortless like that would be appreciated.
Guys, once again, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, csa.orlando. I want to thank you guys for watching us all the way through. Comment if you want to talk about what we've got talking here. If you disagree with us, go ahead and comment, and I will curse you out.
Fight me in real life.
come down to CSA Orlando. Like if you like what we're talking about. Subscribe if you like the content. And as I always say, before we go, thank you, Terrie Bourgeois.
Yeah. Absolutely, man.
We will be back here to do another interview, I hope if you're down for that.
Absolutely. Yeah,
and as I always say, thank you guys. Stay up, stay vigilant, stay locked and loaded, stay brutal. Shalom, shalom. Peace in.